Welcome to the March 24th, 2021 edition of the Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series, brought to you by the National Urban League. I'm your host, Kenneth L. Johnson, president of the Harlem, New York-based diversity recruitment firm, East Coast Executives. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. Let me introduce you to the platform. The Digital Career Success Series, DCSS, is a professional development series that helps members of our Urban League Young Professional chapters and other diverse job seekers develop new skill sets that will enhance their careers. Through digital platforms such as webinars and Facebook Live, the goal is to provide an opportunity for professional development right from one's computer. Today, we expand on the National Urban League's recognition of Women's History Month with Getting to Equal with our guest, Joy Chaney. Joy, pleasure having you. Please tell us why we're here today. What can they expect?
Hi, well, you're here today because today is Equal Pay Day. That is the day the average woman must work into the new year to make what the average man made in the previous year at the end of the previous year. So that's why we're here today. We're here to talk about it. We're here to talk about what the wage gap is. We want to measure it. We're here to talk about what we can do, all of us, to solve for the wage gap, to close it. And we want to spend most of our time not just describing the problem, but talking about what we're going to do about it. So we want to be ambitious today. I wore my shirt just for the topic, just for the day. And I'm just so glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Ken.
Man, we are really glad to have you. You know, yesterday when we shared a brief conversation, you said something that stuck with me throughout the evening. You said, payday is my day. And I love that statement. Payday is my day. And after we had the conversation, I was really of the understanding that this is what you're passionate about. This is what you do. This is kind of just a part of your DNA. So with that being said, if you don't mind, please share with our audience kind of what brings you here. What positions you as the subject matter expert in this space?
Absolutely. Well, I'm actually the executive director of the National Urban League's Washington Bureau. And that also has the title of Senior Vice President for Policy and Advocacy. And I am a new hire. I'm under a month here at the Urban League. And so I'm so thankful to Mark Morial, President and CEO of the Urban League, for bringing me on board, and to my team for welcoming me, which of course includes Kristen. You know, but one of the things that, you know, we all have our passion, we all have sort of the topic that brought us to the work. And while now I get a chance to work on many, many issues over the course of my career, I have really focused on women's economic security. And so that's a passion of the Urban League. That's a passion of mine. That's what brings me here. And earlier in my career, I led a project called Equal Pay Today. And it was a project that was focused on closing the gender wage gap. And one of the things that we did was we helped, along with many other women's groups, who I will name drop them shamelessly throughout this call. We did what we could to bring awareness about the gender wage gap and then to close that gap. And one of the things is leading Equal Pay Days. It's just an opportunity not for us to celebrate, but to place a marker down and say, this is why we have to close the gap for women. This is when we're going to talk about how to close gender wage gaps. And then it's a reminder that wage gaps differ depending on your race and ethnicity. So I know we'll have time to talk about that today. This is just Equal Pay Day for all women. We'll talk more about what it is for Black women, for Asian women, for Latinas, for Native women.
Wow, I love it. I'm so excited about this conversation today, and really just to kind of hear your angles on kind of what people need to do moving forward, how we got here, and just the ways that we can combat this issue. Women's History Month is so important to the National Urban League, and it's just a pleasure to have you not only on board, but here today for the Digital Career Success Series. I'm going to sit back, I'm going to monitor the Q&A and chat. We have a great audience on the Digital Career Success Series, so I know for a fact they're going to bombard us with questions, and as I receive questions, I'll go in and out and try to
Well, one of them already said, let's get these strategies to get the money, and I agree, so let's get started.
There we go, let's do it.
Let's do it. you want to talk about what contributes to the wage gap?
Yeah, let's I'm gonna let you take the
So
steering wheel right here.
many things contribute to the wage gap. So hiring and promotion discrimination is something that most of us are aware of. We're gonna unpack that, but I'm gonna get through all of them first. Occupational segregation. So women being concentrated in fields that pay less, or being concentrated in fields that pay less, right? So sometimes, women are in these fields, sometimes they're steered towards these fields. And sometimes when fields have a predominant number of women in it, they are devalued. So being in fields that pay less contributes significantly to the wage gap. Having an unfair minimum wage. One of the reasons the National Urban League is fighting so hard to raise the minimum wage to 15 and eliminate the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers is because nearly 2/3 of minimum wage earners are women. This would be a huge step forward in closing the gender wage gap for women. We also want to focus on stereotypical gender roles. So, a lot of men want to know what they can do to close the gender wage gap. There's a lot they can do, but one of the key things they can do is if they happen to be in a heterosexual relationship with a woman, what they can do is make sure they are carrying an equal load in terms of the household chores, child rearing, etc., caring for parents. The fact that women still have a predominant a percentage of caregiving roles really does make it hard for us to earn equal pay. Lack of pay transparency is also important. Ken, you're going to say something.
Yeah, I never even thought about it from that standpoint, but basically what you're saying is because women are carrying the household load, they're missing work, maybe due to some outside responsibilities, and in turn, that's impactful to the wage they're earning because they're missing opportunities to earn.
They're missing opportunities to earn. And one of the reasons women have really suffered during this pandemic, and why we say that the COVID-19 has set women's pay equity back a generation, is because all of a sudden, women who were working are now home, and they find themselves, while COVID-19 has harmed men in their salaries, not as much as women. More women are reporting that they had to take leaves of absences from their job, work fewer hours to make sure that their children were able to get online. So men are just kind of going on by their business and continuing their work, or whether they work inside or outside the home now. But women are actually saying, hey, I got to make sure the kids are online. I have to make sure they're doing what they said. I got to run to the pod over here. I have to take them to school. And so they're having to draw back on their own work advancement. So when my husband cooked dinner last night, because I was working, when he does those things, that is actually going a long way towards closing the gender wage gap, because it's saying I don't have to sacrifice my career to take care of my family. Let me go through a few other ones in terms of what contributes. So lack of pay transparency. So we want you to negotiate, but if you negotiate and the employer has all the information and you have no information, that's really difficult. So we want to encourage employers to show pay bands on the face of the job posting. But we also want to make sure that you're not prevented from discussing pay at work. Now, whether you choose to is your business, but you shouldn't have any employer telling you that you can't discuss pay at work, because that's how people find out whether they're being paid fairly. Lack of paid leave. So we just talked about having childcare responsibilities, but if you don't have paid leave, when you're sick, when you have a family member who is sick, if you don't have leave, then you can't take off, and you have to quit your job or actually reduce hours in order to, take care of your family. And that's not really a choice. Lack of affordable childcare, right? So in this pandemic moment, when kids aren't going as much to childcare, we can forget that childcare is very expensive. And so if you don't have affordable childcare, then you have to do it yourself, or you have to ask some other family member to do it themselves. It typically falls to women. It means they have to work less hours. The lack of flexible schedules and predictable scheduling. When you have when in careers where there is flexible scheduling and predictable scheduling, women have a smaller wage gap with men. And that's because you can do the work at any time of day, not just within set hours. And you can plan. If you have predictable scheduling, you can plan for childcare, you can plan for elder care, you can plan your life out. So all of those things contribute to the wage gap. And I didn't forget hiring and promotion. I said that first. We'll get back to talking to more of that through our questions.
Wow, as an aggregate, I'm just thinking about this as you're speaking through some of these points, and they're outstanding, I might add. And I'm sure your husband's a great cook. I want to throw that in as well. But so, I'm looking through this, and I'm thinking about something that came across on the last Digital Career Success Series, where I believe Kristen had hit us with a stat saying that 5 million women have lost their jobs during this pandemic. So how impactful is that going to be for the age gap? I don't want to put you on the spot with just a random question, but I'm thinking about it from that standpoint and just wondering like how detrimental that can be to this number. We may be looking at May 8th next year or in February. I mean, I'm sorry. Well, that would be going forward. So we probably be looking at April, right?
Right. No, I mean, so I have to say the pandemic has had, we believe is going to have some real long-term, impact. Hopefully, it has also really shown for us the fissures in our society, just like it has with race. It is so too with gender. We're really seeing where we have to fill some gaps. So I'm not going to claim that we're not going to fix it. We are going to fix it. But yes, this particular pandemic, because it has hit healthcare workers and frontline workers and restaurant workers, people who are on the front lines of human service, those are jobs that are typically held by women, and therefore we have suffered tremendously. At the same time, school has come into the home, also an area disproportionately led by women, and therefore we're suffering on both ends of the spectrum. Family members are getting sick. Who takes care of those family members? Disproportionately women. So for all of those reasons, women have really, really, really struggled during this pandemic and have lost tremendously: salary, jobs, the whole thing, and their own health.
Wow. It's like you look at the possible win with people, with organizations and companies kind of understanding remote work and flexible scheduling maybe a little better. However, a lot of the other responsibilities that came back into the home, and women are responsible for those. So
that's right. Now, hopefully, Ken, on the other side of this new embrace of being able to work from home, which is something women have been saying forever, is that you ought to be able to have a little more flexibility, and men too, actually. I think that this will, perhaps have some benefit, right? As we rethink how we do the American workplace. But as long as children are not in school, it does make a difference. And this is why, if you are a dad, we need you to step up.
Got it. It takes us all to kind of address the issue.
It does.
So there we go. So all right, just in speaking about that, I know the next slide, let's go to the next slide and speak about how to overcome the wage gap.
Absolutely. So I'm going to approach it from 3 different ways: policymakers, employers, individuals. Policymakers have to pass legislation and policies that are going to close the gender wage gap. One of the things, if you engage today online or anywhere around the wage gap, you're going to see people calling for passage of the Paycheck Fairness Act. That act closes gaps with the Equal Pay Act and makes it easier to file pay discrimination charges, makes it easier for enforcement agencies to investigate these charges, closes wage gaps. It helps address equity, closes gaps that have sort of persisted since we passed the original Equal Pay Act, modernizes the act to meet the current moment that we're in, right? We're not in 1963, we're in 2000, and what year is this, 2021? And so we needed to modernize the act to make sure it meets the modern workplace. So that it requires pay data to be collected by the EEOC. So Paycheck Fairness Act is a really important bill. It's been around for a while. We believe that it will pass this Congress. We're very excited about it.
But I want to speak to you about some of this. So we have people on the line. I'm looking in the chat and people are chiming in from New York and they're chiming in from Philly. And I just saw somebody chime in from Texas. For our audience, for our attendees, what should they do? Can they locally have some type of effect and impact on
Absolutely. Well, first of all, you should know that on the next slide, I'm gonna have a link to where you can find out what the wage gap is in your state, because it varies by state. Every state has some kind of pay equity law. Well, there are actually one or two that do not, but for the most part, and pay discrimination is generally illegal federally, but state and local laws strengthen the law and get it a little closer to what, to being actually effective. So, some of the state data will help you determine what the laws are in your state. I think the AUW link actually will link you to your own state laws. So I encourage you to take a look. But yes, so all of the laws that we're talking about federally, there's usually some kind of state companion. The reason we want to do it federally is it shouldn't matter where you live. You're someone who lives in the United States and you should be paid equally. Let me just go through a few more bills because I want you to raise the wage act. We want to fight for 15. That means gradually raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour and then eliminating the sub minimum wage for tipped workers is really important. Tipped workers make about $2.13. And then the notion is per hour, and they're supposed to make the rest by tips. Anyone who's ever been a tipped worker knows that that is a fallacy. We also want to encourage the Family Act, which is a paid leave bill. And then we want affordable childcare. So these are all bills that are moving forward at the federal level. Pregnant worker fairness is also important. There's considerable discrimination against pregnant workers in this country, meaning women who are pregnant and who are able to work, but their employers reduce their hours or won't hire them, make it difficult for them to work. So those and all their state companions, that's what we want to look at on the policymaker level. Employers, we want you to conduct pay audits in your workplace. We want you to comply with any kind of EEOC mandates as well that we believe will be reinstated and coming your way so that you can collect pay data on the basis of gender and race and ethnicity. But even before the government tells you to do so, you ought to be conducting pay audits, and that's nonprofit, for-profit, wherever you're working. If you're an employer, conduct a pay audit to make sure that you are addressing the wage gap within your workplace, gender wage gap, racial wage gap, ethnicity wage gap, age wage gap. Look at it. Then you want to create flexible workplaces. We talked about that already, so I'll keep that short. Individuals, we want you to encourage your employers to do the right thing. We want you to support the legislation I just talked about, but on a person-to-person level, I want you to engage in salary negotiation. Now, this is tricky because the truth is, women and men negotiate about, the same rates. Men slightly more, but it's not like all men negotiate, all women don't. It's not that simple. But men, and in particular white men, have better results when they negotiate. We think some of that is bias and discrimination, but some of it is the way in which you negotiate and whether you're negotiating for higher amounts, right? So we want you to engage in salary negotiations. We want you to educate yourself. And I have a link in there. We're going to talk hopefully more, Ken, about what I mean when I say, engage in salary negotiations. But there is a training that I linked to by AAUW, that's the American Association of University Women. And they have a Work Smart training that is aimed at making sure all people, men and women, but it's geared towards women, have the tools it takes in order to negotiate their salaries. And then I want you to embrace equitable gender roles. And that's men and women, because it's two parts, right? So we need men to engage more in the home. We also need women to allow them to engage more in the home, embracing equitable gender roles. And then organizations like the National Urban League are very focused on providing other opportunities, making sure that women have and men have access to apprenticeship programs so that they can get into higher earning fields. They can go into fields that require significant training through apprenticeship programs, and leading entrepreneur sites and programs, so that if you are an entrepreneur, you know how to access capital, you know how to be a successful business owner. That's really important as well. Women are predominantly entrepreneurial, in part because we are pushed out of the workplace for all the reasons we discussed before. However, when we get out and on our own, what we find is we are not being funded. We are not being funded, and that is particularly for women of color, but women of all races are simply not being funded, no matter where they are, whether they're a small business and have a hair salon, or whether they are trying to create a tech startup. We're not getting the funds. So we need entrepreneur centers and investments from the government in order to make sure that happens.
Wow, I'm just looking through the Q&A, and I know in your future slides, you'll probably be addressing some of this, but we have some great questions coming in, so please keep them coming.
Let's do the difference between equity and equality. Yeah, I saw that.
Let's do that.
Yes, I can't remember the name of the person, but what's the difference between pay equity and pay equality? Now, one of the things, if you know anything about equal pay, you hear people say equal pay for equal work. And one of the reasons we're careful about using that phrase is because, that's important. But oftentimes, while it still happens, look, I worked at EEOC in the Obama administration, people still do pay men and women differently for the exact same job. Pay equality definitely is an issue. But as I was saying before, it's a range of issues. And so it's not just, I worked at a job, this person worked in a job, one is a man, one's a woman, they're paid differently. Sometimes it's because women are concentrated in jobs that are valued less. And so what we want to do is make sure when we talk about pay equity, we're saying that jobs that are similarly situated, those types of jobs, we should be able, when we're determining whether discrimination is happening, we can actually say, hey, if you're paying housekeepers one thing and janitors another, I know people hate that example, but that's, an example. If you're paying electricians one thing and nurses another, but these are jobs that are highly skilled, jobs that have high value, we want to know why. We want to look into that and see what the real justification of that is, because we shouldn't just be able to pay jobs that predominantly have women in it less. And we see what happens. Teaching profession, teachers used to make some of the highest earnings. As women grew in that profession, they started making less and less and less and less. Till we know now that teachers are not paid nearly what they are deserving. So we want to make sure we are really taking a look at not just equality, equal pay for equal work, but also pay equity.
Excellent description. I was struggling with that myself. I didn't clearly understand it, but you explained that extremely well. Listen, while we're here, just speaking about overcoming the wage gap, I want to dive in real quick. Annette had asked us, how do you stand firm on your asking price, on your asking pay?
Well, one of the ways that you stand firm is that you are armed with knowledge. And so when you go in, you have to have researched. You can't go in with nothing armed. You might say, well, if they didn't post the salary range, how do I know? So you have to go on Glassdoor. You have to go on PayScale. You have to Most important, you have to talk to other people about what the job might pay and what the range is. You have to do that. So, I think in our culture where it's somewhat seen as inappropriate to talk about ambition, as my shirt says, or talk about pay, sometimes it's uncomfortable. You have to get over it. You must talk about pay. Men talk about pay. You have to talk about pay. You have to talk about with your girlfriends, your guy friends, your mentors. And even if you don't talk about it within the workplace, you have to be able to say, you know what, I'm going for this job, or I'm seeking a raise or a promotion. What's the range? Like, what are people being paid? And not just what they're being paid, but what other perks are they getting? Are they getting special benefits? Are they getting free parking? Are they, right? All of those little things, you want to know that as well, because that ultimately goes into your pay. If you're going to work for a nonprofit, you want to look up their 990. Because even if you don't see your salary on there, but you kind of see where the higher ups are making, you can make an assessment about where you might be. You have to talk, you have to ask around. You can't sort of be quiet and kind of show up and just hope for the best. So that will help you kind of stay strong.
Yeah, staying strong is definitely the key.
Yeah.
Great advice. Speaking of staying strong, we want to stay the course. I'm going to let you move forward. We have some other questions in the queue, but we'll get to them later on in your presentation.
Well, no, let's do some questions.
Oh, well,
let's do more questions.
Hey, that's my lane right there. So let's do it. All right. So what are your thoughts on negotiating pay as a state employee? That's from Amber.
Okay, Amber. So the wage gap is smaller when, the wage gap is certainly smaller if you are in government, but it still exists. I think for the federal government, it's around 7%, right? So in state governments, it'll also happen. Again, it's usually about segregating, women being segregated in some of the lower paid, fields. But when you are working for state government, just making sure you have at the very least gone online. Usually those salaries are public, and you actually know what the salary is for that job, and you try to get, you try to figure out where you are in the range, and it's a little more rote, right? Those are typically unionized jobs. They are, there's a lot more information out there about them, and they usually have a little more stricter formula. So you want to do that. You also want to make sure you have someone review your resume. Government jobs are oftentimes very strict in terms of what you're saying your skills are and where you put those skills in your resume, so that they can easily compare you with another candidate, and they know where you stack up. That's really important. We don't want to use prior salary, but sometimes governments still look at what you made in the previous job, which is never good. So we want to stop using prior salary to determine future earnings. It just perpetuates the wage gap. So, I would say that about state government. Same thing with federal government. It's a lot less, negotiating you have to do, but there is still a little, and it's really about making them understand that you're on the higher end of whatever range they have identified for that particular job.
So it sounds like it's a multi-tiered approach, right? Work your network for intel, work your network for guidance, right? Work your network for legit sound information about salaries, but also do your own research to kind of find out what's going on out here.
Absolutely. The other thing is you want to work your network because people outside of you can sort of help you assess your skills and fight for yourself in ways that sometimes you don't always fight for, in the first person. It's just easier. Don't we defend other people more than sometimes we can defend ourselves? This is often true for women in particular, right? So you have to talk to people who can say, no, you are worth this amount. Go out there, ask for it. And a rule of thumb for me is if you are in salary negotiations and you are not asking for an amount that makes you feel uncomfortable, you're not asking for enough. Go up by 10,000. You're not asking for enough. You have to feel uncomfortable. Why? Because we are predisposed to want to be comfortable. We'll cheat ourselves off money just to avoid the being uncomfortable. If you're not uncomfortable, you'll probably undercut yourself. So think about that in terms of salary negotiation. Here's another thing, come from an authentic place. If you're talking about promotions, let's say you're at the workplace, you want to talk about promotion. You have to come with what you've brought to the table. Metrics, numbers, where have you succeeded? Where have you shown value in the company? Don't come in there and talk about what you deserve and what your family needs. And the truth is, nobody cares about that. Your boss doesn't care. You're right. I mean, it's not relevant. You could take that money and go out in the back and burn it. And that would be just as good as using it to feed your kids. It doesn't matter. What matters, it doesn't matter if you have children, if you have support, you could be living alone. It doesn't matter. It's about what you earned. So you have to go in there with a real strong sense of what you brought to the table. It's not about what other people earned. It's about what you've earned. If you go in there like that and you can show, here's what you asked me to do, here's where I did it, here's where I excelled, here's the data to support it. All of that is much harder to argue with. And it lets them know that you mean business and that you are also committed to being in the company, right? Because you're talking about what value you brought. Use we a lot instead of I. It's not about you. They also, what you're signaling to them too, is that they want to keep you. Anyone who does HR knows it costs a lot of money to replace an employee. So if you have someone who's good, you would prefer to keep that person. So, what you don't want to do is go in there with a lot of histrionics. I'm going to quit if, it's good to have a comparator of what the market is paying for a job in your mind, but be careful about transmitting that to your boss, because you never know. The person might say, okay, we'll go out and get that job. And that would not be what you want, because then you'd be unemployed. So you want to be careful. Don't threaten anything you're not willing to back up. Don't do that.
As a recruiter, I definitely adhere to your approach. I think the more data you have that gives you pretty much exact numbers on where you need to be and expect to be in that conversation, the stronger you are as a candidate and the better your chances are of getting exactly what it is that you've asked for. Let's just kind of transition a little. We have Colleen who asked, what is the argument for a gradual increase versus an immediate increase on the $15 minimum wage?
That's an amazing question. Well, look, politics is one thing, right? You actually have to get it. It's the art of the possible. But the real reason is, it does require businesses to pay more money. And so what we don't want to happen is that people are massively laid off because, or businesses close or what, because we're raising the wage. So we do have to be careful about that, and make sure that it's gradual so that businesses can keep up with it. And we do believe that they will be able to. Raising the minimum wage is popular even amongst small businesses. So, the lies out there about it not being popular or people being afraid of it are actually false. But we want to make it gradual so that everyone has the ability to catch up. And so that it is not a shock to the system. We don't want anyone losing their job that doesn't need to.
I know you spoke about legislation from state to state being different, but trending in certain directions. Mm-hmm. And Wanda wants to know, is it legal for someone to ask what you made at your last position?
So it depends on how they do it and when they do it in the process and what state you're in, right? So the Paycheck Fairness Act would limit the ability of people to do that. We'll make it federal that, you shouldn't use prior salary. We don't want to weed anyone out because of prior salary. So saying like at the beginning of a process, every state is different. So this may not be the law in your state, but we don't want to create a scenario where, at the beginning of a process, they say, we're looking for people who've made about this amount. And if you haven't, we're not gonna, interview you because our algorithm says you're not going to take this job. We don't want that. That's harmful. It perpetuates the wage gap for women who might have made, it's not great. It makes it harder for people to find positions. The other problem is it also means that if you're saying the person can't make more than they made, or can only make, 5% more or 10% more than what they made in their previous job, even if your job doesn't quote unquote discriminate on the basis of gender, but that woman over the course of her lifetime has been working in jobs where she is, disproportionately paid low. When she comes to your job, if you say that she can't make more than X amount, then you're perpetuating the wage gap. We want to pay for what the job itself is worth. This is a real change in view. We want to pay for what the job itself is worth, and do it like that, as opposed to saying, she can't make more. I mean, gosh, she can't make that much more. That's not what we're going for. So in some places, in recognition of that, they have made that illegal.
Well, all right. So I'm gonna go to you here on this. We can move forward, but these questions just keep coming. So
the questions.
All right, let's run through a couple more questions real quick. So what are your thoughts on nonprofits who don't offer health and retirement benefits, but willingness to add an additional amount or salary to cover? So all right, so they don't offer health and retirement benefits, but they're willing to pay you more to cover that deficiency.
Well, I mean, that's not all employers can afford the same things. And, when you're looking for a job, that's part of what you have to look at, right? Whether or not the employer can pay you the benefits and the salary that you need. I'm not going to pass judgment on, a company that's making whatever business decision that they feel they have to make in order to stay afloat. But we want to work in places where we want to make it possible for companies to provide benefits for employees. I know that some feel like, well, I'll pay you this and then you can go get it on the exchange and whatnot. The government has worked out ways to make that not an incentive for employers. If you work in a place and you have employees who work a certain number of hours, you need to be able to provide them benefits. But if you're working at a small employer, different assessments might have to be made.
Sometimes, you have to make decisions about what's right for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it comes down to that. Okay.
At different points in your life, that may be perfectly fine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when is it appropriate to negotiate salary? Yearly, or when your role and or responsibilities expand?
Both. If your job changes, you try to negotiate your salary. If you're every year, you need to ask for a raise. Even if they can't give it to you. What you want to say is, I've done XYZ, I've come with all my data, and I'd like a raise. What you're signaling to them is you understand your value, and if they can't give it to you, then that's a real loss to you, and you want something else, right? Maybe they're like, hey, I can't give you money, but I can change your title, and maybe that title will yield greater benefits for you later. I can give you more leave. Technically, you want more annual leave, because that's more money that you'll get at the end, typically, because you get paid out annual leave. I'll let you can figure out other things that come from different line items, in their budget. But you definitely want to ask. Let me offer a warning to you, though. Don't be a job description employee. That kind of employee typically does not get raises and is fired at some point.
Give me the definition of that, please.
So when your boss says, I need you to do X, don't say it's not within my job description.
Okay.
It's not what you want. Because, most jobs end with, and duties as assigned. So, you have to be flexible with that. If, so every time someone asks you to do something that's not in your job description, don't go tit for tat with them. Just keep in mind, you might want to hold it. If it's a whole different job, that's a total different thing. But if it's just some small change in your duties, don't freak out and demand, a $10,000 raise. Now, but keep it in your mind, you did that and it added value for the company. And you ultimately want to bring your boss solutions, not problems. Solutions, not problems, is what you bring your boss.
I love it. I love it. So how does one frame the request for pay parity when everyone within the organization identifies as the same gender? Example, everyone's a woman.
That happens. Well, first of all, just because, you're not, is it pay parity, or is it that you just work in an industry that pays less? Now, sometimes if you're working in the nonprofit sector, it may make less, it may pay less, but that doesn't mean that you yourself are being discriminated against. So keep in mind, don't go in there and assume I'm being paid less because of my gender. I'm being paid less because of my race. Just don't go in there, assume that. Try to get as much data as you possibly can before you make that assumption. And so that, I would just keep that in mind. I think one of the reasons we believe in pay transparency is actually Harvard Business Review has studied this. When people know what folks make, it actually takes out a lot of fear in the workplace, in general belief that someone's being paid more than them, or they're being paid inequitably, because they know. So just keep that in mind. There are other downsides perhaps, but it actually kind of can turn down the fear factor.
Got it. Okay. So we're going through some questions. I know we're coming up on our Q&A time, so I believe there's more to your slides.
Yeah, let's go.
Let's kind of go forward with that.
Absolutely. So let's talk about equal pay days. Today is Equal Pay Day for all women, right? All women compared to all men. How do we judge this? We look at median earnings between men and women who are working full-time and are over the age of 16. That's how we judge that. It doesn't account for all the other factors, right? Job hours worked, time away from the workplace, experience level, et cetera, et cetera. Job description, it doesn't account for that, because really it's just about us getting a snapshot of the problem. When you account for all those things, the pay gap is smaller, but there's still a pay gap. So you'll see some different numbers out there, but you'll always see a wage gap. And it typically will track the way we've shown it here. So ask all of these women as compared to white, non-Hispanic men. So Asian women, API women typically make 87 cents on the dollar that every white non-Hispanic man makes. Their equal pay day is March 9th. I'm going to put an asterisk there and come back to it. Equal pay day, all women. Black women, white women are 79 cents, for every dollar a white man makes. Black women, 63 cents for every dollar a white man makes. Our equal pay day is not until August 3rd, and National Urban League will be one of the co-sponsors of Black Women's Equal Pay Day this year. Native women make around 60 cents on the dollar of every white non-Hispanic man. And if you look on the slide that I have there, what AAUW does, some people loop all Native women together. AAUW has always separated out American Indian and American Alaskan Native women, and Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders. So it just depends on how you do those assessments. And then Latino Equal Pay Day is the last one that we acknowledge in a year, and that's not until October 21st. they make about 55 cents on every dollar white non-Hispanic men make. Now, let me go back to AAPI, because like I said, AUW mixes things up a little differently. When we talk about AAPI, the AAPI community is extremely diverse. Many ethnicities could fall under that umbrella. And as a consequence, while some Asian American women do make higher than the average for other women, many of them make far, far, far less. Vietnamese, Burmese, Hmong women. So just keep in mind, one of the reasons the hashtag for AAPI Equal Pay Day is always not your model minority is they get looped in together, and that sometimes it skews what the experiences are of individual communities. Let me say something else about gender pay disparity. We talk a lot about gender, but it's not just a gender, it's also a racial issue. So we see the disparities based on race, right? If you're looking at these dates and you see that it corresponds to a wider gap. But keep in mind, for Black women, sometimes we focus on the race part. We're like, well, it's because, there's racial discrimination, and that's true. Black men make less than white non-Hispanic men. So there is a wage gap between Black men and white men. However, there's also a wage gap between Black men and Black women. So for women, just know, and the same is true across the board, women within the same racial demographic make less than the men in their racial demographic. And for Black women, when you consider that we are by and large more likely to be college educated, that really says something, that we're still making less than Black men. So just know, it's not just a race issue. It is also a gender issue. It's those things intersecting together. Okay, so that's just really important, because I think sometimes we forget about it. So we have to be, as a racial justice group, we have to make sure we're fighting for women as well. What other questions you got?
Yeah, I'm bouncing through the Q&A here. So we do have another one. Do you think that certain industries pay less because they are traditionally areas where women work? I think you spoke.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I talked about that. Occupational segregation is a real thing. While we're on it, let's talk about sexual harassment. That also contributes to the gender wage gap. One of the reasons we're so focused on raising the minimum wage and eliminating the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers is because when people rely on tips, those industries have the highest rates of sexual harassment and the lowest rates of agency for the employee, because they rely on the happiness of the person providing them service, that they're providing service to. So they need the tips. That's how they make their money. So it's dangerous for them. Higher rates of assault, higher rates of harassment. So this is something that's very important when you're looking at how do you close the gender wage gap, addressing sexual harassment, also addressing the wage gap through eliminating the sub-minimum wage tip will address sexual harassment. They're symbiotic in that way. The other reason is sometimes women will leave jobs because they're being harassed. And if you have to, or because their boss has asked them out on a date, or however you want, so if you have to leave your job, then that makes it difficult to amass the wealth that you need and the traction you need. So that's why it's connected. So I want women to think about that. And the other thing is that sometimes women will concentrate in jobs that they feel are safer for them. But those jobs may actually pay less.
This is an interesting question here that we have. So what about potential employers who try to find out if you are married and on your husband's insurance? There are times that they ask it outright. What have you heard that?
To find out whether they so they're potential employers and they're trying to see whether that is completely inappropriate.
Yeah, but right.
completely inappropriate. In some places might like outright be illegal. So in Washington, D.C. or in the federal government, marital status cannot, is a protected classification. Right. So we know at one point in our nation's history, if you were a married woman, you couldn't work. Right. You could work if you were single, but if you were married, you couldn't. So we want to discourage that wherever it is, and at the very least, it should be considered sex discrimination.
Yeah, wow, interesting. So as I'm looking here at some of this information, and I know you mentioned that some of these resources, there's an organization in your resources. I think you mentioned it yesterday, and it might be AAUW.
Yeah, they have a salary negotiation workshop.
Yeah, so, they do workshops, right?
They do. And matter of fact, I don't know if we can click on it, but if you should go there. They have a program called Work Smart. Work Smart provides salary negotiation training for for workers at all levels of career. But they also have something called Smart Start, I believe. Maybe getting it wrong, but it's on that same page. And that is for people at the entry level who are just coming out of school. Let's talk about that, because I see someone who is a part of the Young Professionals program at Urban League. The wage gap grows over time for obvious reasons, right? Women have children, there's childcare, all those things. That happens. It makes a little sense why at certain ages, 20s and 30s, the wage gap grows. But the wage gap exists almost at the beginning of someone's career. So you might start off that first year making the same thing as your male counterpart, but within a year that we see it grow. And it starts off little small, little things here and there, not that big of a deal. This person gets one thing, this person gets another, but it grows and grows and grows over time. And then when you couple with the fact that you might have to step out of the workplace to care for children or a family member or loved one or whatnot, that also is, then contributes to it. When you get older, sometimes it begins, the wage gap will shrink a little bit again, but by then you have lost considerable money, retirement income, savings. Women on average lose about $400,000 over the course of a 40-year career. Black women, nearly $1 million over the course of a 40-year career. Latinas, over $1.1 million over a 40-year career. And that number grows depending on where you live, right? So it is, think about all the things that you can't do, like save, buy a house, save for retirement, when you have that amount of money coming out of your pocket. So these salary differentials at different points in your life begin early. So we want to make sure that women and men are on an equal footing going into it. And by the way, I do want to talk about discrimination, because sometimes we are gaslit and made to think that what we feel isn't really happening, okay? Discrimination does still happen. Women are most often judged based on what people see, like what they produced, right? And this is why it's so important to have your data. Men are often judged by potential. Okay? Oh, I have real faith in him, or I see myself in him. I see his growth potential. Right? That makes a difference, okay? We all want to be judged on our potential of things yet unseen. So that does happen. And also, depending on who is the decision makers, why representation is so important, and we have to have more women in positions of power. So many decisions are made with implicit bias in mind. You know that feeling you get when you say, geez, that person really reminds me of myself, or I just like them so much. That's because they do. They remind you of you. And people that are most likely are going to remind you of you. And so when someone reminds you of yourself and you like someone, everything is sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. What they do really well, you lean into, you're like, okay, you know what? They do that really well. It's better than it's ever been. What they do poorly, you make an excuse for. If you don't know the person, if you're not as familiar with them, if once you get in your mind that they're different from you, that they are the other, then everything that they do that's negative, well, that's more of the rule rather than the exception. So those are all things that go into it. There is both intentional discrimination and unintentional discrimination, but it has a pernicious impact on the workplace.
Wow, amazing information that you shared today. I know that speaking of sharing, I know that you're a sharer, and we will share this episode on the UL Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series YouTube channel. I know some people have asked about that, but in general, I know you're pretty active on different platforms. Is there any way for people to stay connected to you and your
Absolutely. Content? Well, I want you to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I also want you to follow me at Joy Tweets, that's JOI Tweets. I also want you to follow National Urban League. Hopefully, Kristen can put in our Twitter handle, as well as the Twitter handle of the Washington Bureau, which is NUL policy.
It's been amazing today.
Yes, Ken, you were amazing today, and we want to thank Kristen and everyone who contributed to putting this together. Let me just leave you with this. Please negotiate your salaries. And when you see a job posting that you think maybe you're not quite qualified for, go for it anyway. Because oftentimes studies have shown that women will undercut themselves. They'll say, you know what? This job asks for 10 things. I have 7 things. I'm not going to go for it. Men will say, this job asks for 10 things. I have 4 things. I'm going to go for the person's boss. So making sure that I'm joking in part, but not in total. And so some employers are starting to put on the job posting, these are suggestions. This is an ideal candidate, but we are wanting to see people even if you don't have all the skills. Why? Because we're signaling, please, ladies, don't cut yourself out by not applying because you may not have 100%. No one has 100% of the qualifications because they're describing sort of the perfect person, and none of us are perfect. So remember that as well. Negotiate, go for the job, ask for the promotion. One other thing, Ken, when you are in a job, make sure, and if you are an employer, make sure you're not only doing a pay audit, you're doing an opportunity audit to make sure that people of across race and gender are getting the opportunity to the roles and the clients and the tasks that are going to enable them to move up in the company. So if someone's not getting that, then they're really not being treated equitably.
Wow, amazing. We'd like to thank you, of course, for just joining us today and sharing all of your insight on such an impactful topic. On behalf of the National Urban League, Wanda Jackson, Kristen Bray, I'm Kenneth L. Johnson. I just want to thank you, Joy Chaney. I knew this was going to be amazing. To our attendees, thank you very much for just joining us today. Please join us on April 7th. We'll be back to do it again from 12 to 1. That will be Action to Impact, and it will be presented by our sponsor on that day, Hubble. So with that being said, I will see you guys April 7th. Joy Chaney, I hope to see you again somewhere. I know you're with NUL now, so I'm sure I'm going to see you as we move around, but I'm just happy to be part of your team. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Take care.